Hello, everyone. It's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and welcome to Wasteland Talks, my weekly talk show where I talk about whatever the hell I want. And this is another edition of album analysis. And I have my two music friends who, of course, I wouldn't want to talk about taking a deep dive into a musical album with anybody else. And we have Alex and Jim. Thank you guys so much for coming on.
It's been too long, man.
Yeah, it's been a long time. Yeah, thanks for having me back, man.
Absolutely. I'm glad we can convene this triumvirate of music lovers.
Hmm.
And we're diving into an album that is indeed 30 years old this year, which is still not as old as us. So there you go. So just throwing that out there. And that is Super Unknown by Soundgarden. Now, I figured we could kind of give each of our own perspectives on the band Soundgarden and maybe even grunge in general. And then we can dive into the album. But Alex, what's your history with Soundgarden and grunge?
Yeah, so it's crazy as you say it's 30 years old. This was the first time I listened to this album all the way through, but I've heard these songs my whole life. I remember being in grade school, eating cereal, waiting for the bus, and like hearing Black Hole Sun. And then I think it was years later, I think it was actually when I got to college that I like would hear Spoon Man. And that was like on one of my playlists, like one of my favorite songs to like work out to. I love that song. Um, Day I Tried to Live, Black Days was a very popular, at least in Trenton, was a popular open mic song for people to play. And so this album had a lot of life to it for a long time. I mean, it still does, but I never listened to, the record. But my like just with Soundgarden, a lot of, for me at least, when I was more conscious of them, Audio Slave had already started.
Mm.
So Chris Cornell, like for me, once I got into middle school, high school, it was like Soundgarden was already a thing of the past. But as far as the radio is considered Soundgarden was still very present. They had obviously made like a musical mark, you know. So that's kind of I was never a fan. I still can't say that I'm like a Soundgarden guy, but I always respected their sound. I always liked some of their songs. I just didn't, I was never part of, like, it never found its way into like, oh my God, I have to listen to like this album or that album. But Soundgarden was always like, oh yeah, I always liked Soundgarden. I just never really knew why.
Mhm. How about you, Jim?
I definitely came to Soundgarden through the radio. Definitely 93.3 WMMR or 94.1.
I miss 94.1. Then they
I don't
turned
remember
into
it
a
at all.
damn sports talk radio.
Sports. Speaking of sports, this album has been on rotation since the Phillies melted down. I've listened to it like every day, and it's been appropriate.
Yeah, it feels like it would be, to be perfectly honest.
My I have in my head I separate Super Unknown into like the singles. Not even there was a single called My Wave that I don't ever remember hearing before. Um but like all those songs Alex just mentioned,
Mhm.
I've heard them so many times that it's almost like Black Dog by Led Zeppelin or like a lot of AC/DC hits. I can't listen to them with fresh ears because they've been poured in my ear for so long. And then there's the rest of the album, and things get really interesting, especially like the last third of the album has gotten more and more interesting. Like as I've listened to it uh, on the daily, but I had a CD called A Sides from Soundgarden. Um, I was looking today. I think it was '96, so it was like a almost like a greatest hits. It was almost like they knew the band was coming to an end because I think they did one more album in '96. Then they broke up and Audio Slave happened. And then they did one more album after, which I couldn't name any songs off of.
Mhm.
But I remember opening up that CD um, and reading the liner notes. And the early songs from Soundgarden were a little scary to me. Jesus Christ Pose, um, Rusty Cage,
Mhm.
Flower. There were a couple more that like I'd never, they were before my time. And then it got into like Burden in My Hand and Spoon Man, which were favorite songs. That's why I bought the CD, you know. But the liner notes, I wish I could remember who wrote them, but he said he saw early Soundgarden like in Seattle, and the quote was "total fucking godhead," and to me that was like very sacrilegious and edgy. So like from that moment, they were really cool to me. You know what I mean? Um, yeah. So the band Soundgarden, I think I came to them through Burden in My Hand, Spoon Man, and Outshined. And then from the A side CD, I've kind of worked my way from there. And I'd never listened to this album all the way through until when did we talk about this? A month ago, a month and a half ago?
Around there,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, but apparently it was a massive hit. So I felt like it would be a good, oh, grunge music in general. I was never a big Nirvana fan. Foo Fighters, there were a couple songs that I liked. Um, maybe Alice in Chains, maybe Alice in Chains. I listened to them a bit. Pearl Jam, like the first couple albums, I'll still spin them I'll still listen to them every once in a while. But like, I wouldn't call myself a grunge fan. I wouldn't call myself a Soundgarden fan, but like Chris Cornell has left a huge, way bigger than Kurt Cobain for me. Like Kurt Cornell, Chris Cornell. Chris Cornell, like when he died, that was a bigger deal to me than anything that Kurt Cobain and Nirvana ever did. You know.
Yeah, it's interesting for me because growing up, this was not the kind of music that was around me at all. Because it took me even a while until like well into high school for me to start listening to heavier things. Because to be perfectly honest, growing up, it was mostly like my mom is admittedly my mom up until at least a few years ago has always been more hip with music than I was. So like she would listen to like when I was growing up would be a lot of she'd listen to Red Hot Chili Peppers, but it would be mostly like Matchbox 20, Goo Goo Dolls, Wallflowers, stuff like that. And I was listening to like 98.1 the WOGL in Philadelphia, which was like 60s and 70s Motown soul and rock and roll. So like the rock and roll I was listening to was like Billy Joel and Credence and stuff like that. So like this really was not my thing. And even when in high school into college I started expanding my horizons and listening to like some heavier stuff like probably one of the first ones was like Metallica and stuff like that. But like I never liked grunge. And also grunge never really fit with like my personality or anything like that cuz I am the least grunge person that you will probably ever meet. I'm not sad that it killed hair metal. That probably needed to die. Uh, but I wish it didn't take the rest of rock music with it. Because that was the tricky thing in like the early 90s. Grunge music changed rock music permanently. And it's much more alternative at this point. And it's hard to find bands that like have that like classic rock kind of sound. And if they are, they definitely sound very derivative and sound like they're just trying to be other bands. I'm not purposefully trying to shit talk Greta Van Fleet right now, but I'm not gonna say that I didn't think the first time I heard Tomb, I was like, why have I never heard this Led Zeppelin song before? because it literally sounds like Led Zeppelin.
Sure.
But this was never my kind of thing, and also I've never been a fan of Nirvana specifically. That's just too much. Like that is not my
Mhm.
not my thing. But I'll admit that there's definitely some Pearl Jam I'll listen to, and STP, Stone Temple Pilots. I do like some STP. But
That's fun.
one,
I wouldn't have thought of STP as being grunge music. I don't even, because that was my second CD. My first CD, Big Willie style, Will Smith.
That was
My
like one of my
second
first
CD,
CDs.
my second CD,
my mom
Purple by
also owned that.
STP. Yeah, of course. Good Philly boys, right? Purple
Yeah.
by STP exposed me way too early to hard rock. Yeah. But I wouldn't even think of that as grunge. So that's interesting that you
Is it
grouped them
grunge?
together.
I assume that it was. It's like those bands are all from like that era of music together. I feel like STP might be feel a little bit more straightforward hard rock music than maybe some of the other ones. But it's one of those kinds of things where I because and then you have the afterbirth of grunge, like post grunge, which was like, Nickelback and Creed
Mhm.
came out of that era and like new metal and stuff like that. But
We should talk
Soundgarden,
about that new metal specifically. Yeah.
Disturbed when they were new metal, and then they just kind of turned into hard rock music. But that's okay. I still like Disturbed. But
Yeah.
it's such an interesting time for rock music at that point and metal music. And I feel like Soundgarden was probably the band that I listened to the most out of all those bands from like
Mm.
grunge era. I've definitely also that Black Hole Sun music video is one of the creepiest things you'll ever see in a music video. But you'd hear songs like that and Spoon
Mhm.
Man and Chris Cornell was incredible as a singer. There's just so much feeling there. I besides probably Black Hole Sun, probably the song that got me into Chris Cornell the most was his Bond theme, to be perfectly honest, for
Really?
Casino Royale.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like underappreciated Bond theme. Doesn't get brought up enough. Um, but he was just such a talented singer, and like I know we talked about an Audio Slave album for this segment that we've done on my show. But this was certainly the first time I think this is the first time I ever listened to a grunge band's album all the way through. To be honest, it's been always been more of like sprinklings of like songs.
Sure.
And I've heard a handful of these songs. Like I'm pretty sure it's hard to get through listening to rock music your whole life and never hearing Black Hole Sun. So that one
Right.
obviously was pretty obvious. And yeah, Spoon Man became more popular on the radio like
Yeah.
later. And
That's what I thought.
yeah,
Yeah.
because like I remember when that started first getting more plays on the radio, and all I have to say is I grew up listening to 1029 WMGK, the classic rock radio in Philly. And the second they started playing grunge music on there, I'm just like,
Okay.
I don't like this. Uh, because like they started playing, I think they played Nirvana one time, and then I heard like the Black Crows. I'm like, why are the
Mhm.
90s on here? When did this become classic rock music?
They did. Yeah, it
And
did.
it did, because yes, this is 30 years old.
Right. Yeah.
So when I was born, 30 years before that was 1961.
Mhm.
And then you put that in perspective and realize, oh crap, I guess this really is classic rock music at this point. But I guess for both of you, what were some like obviously like Black Hole Sun, something we've all heard plenty of times before. But what are
Yeah.
some of the songs that stood out to you both from the album?
Well, I mean, I definitely want to talk about that, and I do feel like we all need to look at. I know that I was watching Frank, one of our friends here who's a musician in the scene, has been for a long time, has some Weezer documentary on. A lot of people don't talk about Weezer when it comes to grunge, but if you listen to like the Sweater song and you listen to like the dissonant melody of that guitar, dun 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 dun, it's like slightly dissonant. You're not going to get that very often from pop music.
Mm.
And so that is an ingredient of the grunge era that I think is part of the reason why you might not like Nirvana so much, is because Kurt Cobain was very good at like creating a pop song. And instead of using the chord that a Motown band would use, he would use like the step up from it or the step down from it, and it would sound like wrong in any other, if any other person tried to do it. But because he did it the way he did it, whatever mode it was, or, whatever, now it's grunge
Mhm.
because it's like a pop chorus over a dissonant chord progression, and that's why grunge was kind of special, is because you could come and get away with that, which was kind of cool. And there's a lot of that on this record. There's these very odd. I don't have the musical knowledge to know what the hell is going like. There's a very that's why you say your brother might have come on. It would have been interesting because like there's really odd like melodies and structures in here that are not pleasant to the ear, but then they end up creating a pop song out of it. I mean, at the end of the day, it is a 4 to 5 minute pop song, but it's got dissonance in it, And so a really good example of that, I wasn't going to talk about it right away, but I do want to talk about My Wave and Mailman and stuff like that.
Mm.
Head Down. Head Down has this acoustic sounding guitar melody in it that's really weird. And then all of a sudden, the acoustic sounding guitar turns into an electric guitar. I don't know if you noticed that. And then it's like it sounds acoustic, and then like it turns into like an obviously electric guitar. And it's very weird. It's a very weird song. And so you have stuff like that on here that's like really different. And when you first listen to it, it's almost kind of a test. Like, do I want to keep listening to this? You know? And that's what was different about that era with some of these bands. Mailman is another one. That's one of my favorite deep cuts. Um, you
Mine
know,
too. Mine too.
because yeah, and talk about like that sounds like new metal before new metal ever existed. Not necessarily Cornell's like vocals, but the how deep the guitar tone sounds, and it's just the same riff over and over again, like rubbing your face in it. And then there's I'll stop there, but you have songs like that where it's almost like they're dragging you through the mud of this riff. It's just not typically what a pop band or a popular music artist would do to its listener. And so that's where it's a very, it's a trying genre, which was why grunge was what it was. you know Same thing. I'll avoid talking too much about Nirvana, but there are songs on Nevermind that like when I'm listening, like they make me want to tear my hair out. But if I keep listening, I'm like, oh, I get it. Oh, okay. So it was different. It was very different. I think it was the last like truly unique rock era, in my opinion. The last truly unique era for rock music, before things got weird again. I don't
And
know.
then it just then it just became all the same.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, but it got all mixed up. But that's another conversation. So yeah, songs like that, the dissonance is I think the element of grunge, that kind of is through a lot of these bands, you know.
Cool. Yeah, I was hoping we'd be able to like nail down a definition because I don't like Shane said he thinks of STP as being kind of grungy. um, Me, I don't know. There's always just you know what it is? It's Seattle. I associate grunge with Seattle. And I don't know what it was that came out of there, if it was the local music scene. Sorry, got to get rid of my updates here. Like Eddie Vedder came out of there, and Cornell came out of there, and Kurt Cobain came out of there. I don't know if their kind of mind melding hit something that was just gold, you know. But I think of grunge as being a place. I think more than anything else. So I'm glad that you have an idea of like technically what makes grunge grunge. Um, like I said before, I think of the album as like the songs that I knew before, the songs that I discovered a month and a half ago. So like of the old songs, I've heard Black Hole Sun so many times that like it can't possibly affect me the way that it should. um I know that out of I think out of any songs on the album, Black Hole Sun has kind of transcended rock music altogether. There have been covers of Black Hole Sun recently. I don't know if it was like Phoebe Bridgers or somebody like that.
They used it for the Dune trailers.
Oh, they did. That's right. That's right.
Oh, that's crazy.
They
So it
definitely
probably
used it. They were using that and Dark Side in some of the song Eclipse from Dark Side of the Moon. They were
okay.
using that for it, which was interesting. That they were using
Cool.
covers of those songs and stuff like that. The Eclipse one was particularly creepy and eerie. I'm just like, whoa, this is making me feel some things watching this trailer. But no, it's interesting because every song will get a slowed down cover of it for a movie trailer at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't usually think of Pink Floyd and Soundgarden being linked. Like I'll think of like Zeppelin and Black Sabbath, like blues based
Hmm.
rock slash early metal, like what we now call heavy metal. People
Yeah.
say people say Zeppelin's metal. I will never call it Zeppelin metal. People say Sabbath is metal. I'm like, okay, that's fine. But they're both based on blues.
Yeah.
And this record, especially to me, is um it's very much on that foundation, as weird as it is. But we're talking about tracks, right? So of the old tracks, I don't feel qualified to talk about Black Hole Sun, and I can't do it justice as a song. I love Spoon Man still, and I love Fell on Black Days and The Day I Tried to Live. Uh, I like them all. To the deeper tracks, I would wake up with Mailman just rolling in my head, and I don't know that that's a very healthy place to be. A lot of the themes in this album are not very healthy. They're very self-destructive, which was another thing I was going to bring up for grunge. But like I think grunge tends to be a bit self-destructive. But
It's all the depression in the rainy
there's a
Pacific
lot,
Northwest.
there's a lot of depression. Yeah, and I
Mm.
remember our discussion on that Audio Slave album being really somber. So hopefully we can lighten it up a little bit here. But like he was writing a lot about depression in this record, a lot. So I like Mailman a lot, and I find Fresh Tendrils more and more interesting the more I work through the album. I don't know if it's that like it's really the only track you can hear the bass coming through, so it's different. Um, but it's a little unconventional. And then Fourth of July, I also like as far as deep tracks go. um, Maybe just because it's Cornell Cornell sounds fucking awesome on this album. He just
Amazing.
sounds amazing. Yeah. Like I've heard I did listen to some outtakes or like demos on them. So I think all three of us were listening to the 20th anniversary mix or master of this album.
Yeah.
From what I understand, it sounded pretty good 20 years before that, but it sounds good. And like just his voice just sounds so good. 4th of July, I think, is where I left off. There's like an octave, not effects. Like there's 2 tracks. He recorded up here and then down here, and the layered effect is just really cool to me.
And is he shouting? Is he kind of like shouting in one of the tracks?
Yeah.
He's like shouting, like guttural shouting. Yeah, I noticed that just as I pulled up before. I was like, that's yeah, it was some really cool stuff.
If I could, my girlfriend, I have a blend playlist with her on Spotify, and like Audio Slave songs have been cropping up in our blend list. And she was like, "Are you okay?" Like, like she thinks Soundgarden is scary. The only song that I found to be a little scary was 4th of July. I there's got to be some drug abuse happening in the mix here somewhere. So I do get that there's a scary thing here, but sonically, any track that Cornell like screams his way through in different octaves just sounds amazing to me. Yeah. Shane, did you have any fresh tracks that stood out to you?
I really liked Limo Wreck. That was one that stood out to me a lot. And also just pointing out the across the board, looking at the lyrics. Because like I was trying to listen to this more with like, on Spotify where you could like have the lyrics playing along. Um, and I'm just like, he's not okay. And obviously, like things weren't okay. And and that's the thing that a lot of musicians came, like a lot of great music came from a lot of pain. And like just like the opening verse of "Ears of the feeble, hands of the slaves, skin of the mothers, mouths of the babes, building the towers belongs to the sky. When the whole thing comes crashing down, don't ask me why." And it's just like there's a lot of darkness. There's a lot of like there's a lot of things that turn into pain, or to a lot of things that turn into negativity in the lyrics in a lot of these songs. What
That's the
was one of
word.
those?
That's the word that was on my head. It's very negative. Yeah, it's really negative.
And it's like this was a very specific time in the 90s. And it's very interesting because like growing up, it's like a lot of people I know are very nostalgic for the 90s. But like that was being a kid in the 90s. Um like coming out of the 80s, the 90s were a big like hit in terms of like people's perspective on things, because like the 80s were supposed to be like this, money capitalistic kind of perspective, and then you just have like grunge music ripping through, and just tearing, like shredding through this illusion that a lot of people had of like, look at all this money we have, we're happy, right? And it's so interesting because for so long, Black Hole Sun has been like that's the Soundgarden. That's like what Soundgarden is. And then I don't know if you both feel the same way, but like listening to this album, it's like the weirdest song. It
Yeah,
doesn't fit
it doesn't fit. I
everything
was gonna say
else.
that. Yeah.
And it's so weird that like that became the song that became so popular from this album, because it's not
It,
really representative of what Soundgarden really sounds like.
right.
And because it is a lot bluesier, it does have like there's a like I don't know if I would say like it sounds like blues music, but it has that same kind of feeling where stuff's dirty. Like these don't sound like clean songs. And there's a lot of grit going on in Chris Cornell's performance and the music, and also like Black Hole Sun has such a strange like tempo and specific feel to it. And then there's a lot of songs on this album that are very heavy. Like
Right.
there's some really like, to be frank, there's songs on this that go a lot heavier than what was metal music for most of the late 80s.
True.
Like there's no
Yep.
cherry pie here. Um or
Right.
like Poison and Warrant and stuff like that. And this is what like really brought that back. I just want to throw out a funny side thing about other bands trying to cope with grunge. Have either of you listened to AC/DC's album Ball Breaker?
No, no, I never heard it.
What year did Ballbreaker come out?
95, I think it
Okay.
was.
Okay.
So they specifically build that as we are grungier than grunge. And like they had songs like Cover Me in Oil and Ball Breaker and like, standard AC/DC kind of stuff. But they try to get like it's like dark and grittier, kind of AC/DC coming out of the 80s. And it's just like it still sounds like AC/DC. It just sounds less 80s. Uh after some of their stuff in the late 80s. But it's so interesting like what grunge did to so many. Like it either killed bands where it's just like nobody's interested in the kind of music that you're playing anymore. Or it forced bands to kind of like shift gears a little bit.
Right.
And you can definitely feel like, and I agree with you, Alex, to be perfectly frank, no matter how much like I'm not the hugest grunge fan, this was one of the last periods of like truly unique evolution of rock music.
Hmm.
Because I feel like now it's mostly just like it's all alternative and it's all like um those who listen to music in Philly and listen to the radio like 104.5 sounding music. You might occasionally get like a Chili Pepper song dropped in there, but everything else sounds like so much of that like
Well,
alternative rock music from now.
right.
Um and which I think is heavily influenced by like new wave and
Okay.
synthy kind of things and stuff like that. But like this album goes hard.
It was. It was.
And
Yeah. It was heavy. I like what you say about that. It sounds more metal than like some of the metal that came like right
mhm,
before it. Um, you know, it feels like it was the last celebrated, era in rock and
mhm,
roll because the bands and the groups that came after that got a lot of flack, even though they sold a lot of records and made a lot of money and put a lot
through
of butt
Nickelback.
seats. They got a lot, yeah, yeah, Nickelback, Creed, but and a lot of Limp Bizkit and even like Linkin Park at the time, even though we look back on some of those bands, hey, some of those bands actually weren't that bad. They had some good songs at the time. There was a lot of this going on, like, well, they're not real. That's not real music, like that happened a lot. And Nirvana, Pilots, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden were already like, oh, these guys are legit. These guys are
Mhm,
like, these guys are really they're real musicians. Um, and so it's just weird that was just the narrative that just felt like that's the way I grew up talking about them. This was cool and this wasn't cool. It was just the way people talked.
mhm,
Um, but you know, there's I this obviously when you listen to this record, I can hear a lot of bands getting influenced later on by how heavy some of this stuff is. I don't hear like a direct System of a Down influence, but I'm like, ooh, that guitar tone is in there. I don't hear a direct Disturbed, but ooh, that's kind of in there. You know, I see the door opening for Metallica to drop their tuning really low and do something different with it. I hear like, oh man, like all that stuff that came later, like in some of the way that this record was made. Yeah, that's really special. I think that's really cool. And that's the great thing about alternative music to me is that you can do so many different things with your record and with your music. I mean, Smashing Pumpkins. I think they came out of Chicago. Um, their records go so many different places. You know, even if you're not a Smashing Pumpkins song fan, like there are songs that they've done, they're so freaking cool.
Shout
Same
out
thing
to
with
our
Stone
friend
Temple.
Matt,
Same thing
who's
with
a huge Smashing Pumpkins fan.
yeah.
Shout out to Matt. What's up, Matt?
Oh, Matt Williams.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, all right. Yeah, no, they've got some great songs. Um, but yeah, back to not to harp on Black Hole Sun, but um yeah, the only part of that song that sounds like the rest of this record is like I think it's the bridge section. Dun 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 dun. Everything else sounds like something completely different. Like it was obviously recorded
Mhm.
to be the single. Like it
Well,
feels.
I could share something on that note. Um, do you guys know Rick Beato?
Yeah,
Okay, so I know he was a producer. I don't know who he produced, but he's got a YouTube
yeah,
following. So he got to interview. I mean, over the years, he's probably interviewed a lot of people.
yeah.
So what I, from what I understand, the producer was getting demos from Chris Cornell and was like, "Dude, you can do better. Like these aren't great. What do you like?" And Chris Cornell said that he liked the Beatles and he liked Cream. So like classic rock.
Mm, yeah,
Interesting.
And so they had a conversation about this, and I don't know how much like they actually connected, but Chris Cornell thought about it and went and did 4 new songs. And Black Hole Sun was one of those 4 new songs where
okay,
he was. So I talking
yeah,
about grunge, like taking the like major key poppiness of the Beatles and the rock and roll of Cream, and
mhm.
then like the distortion of grunge. I don't know. That's where apparently Black Hole Sun came from. And the producer was like, yes, that is the single, like you said.
Mm.
But Chris Cornell, he had no idea. He was like, oh, you like that song? I,
Yeah,
why do you like that song more than, this one or that one on the album? But
sure,
it was
sure.
the producer or their manager or somebody like that's decision to like this is the song. And obviously he was right, but
Right.
Because I feel like it's the kind of song that a lot of the music on this album from this is one of those kinds of albums where like I cannot just listen to this a couple of times and really feel like I got all of it. And I feel like because it's the kind of album that if you passively listen, a lot of it will bleed together. But you gotta like really
Yeah.
listen to and engage with it. Black Hole Sun is the kind of song where you're just like,
it makes you
that
stop.
is
Yeah, it
it
makes you stop and
sounds
listen to it,
Right.
doesn't it? Right.
it stands out. And
Right.
that's the kind of thing that you want for a single.
That's
So
true.
that makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense. And that's very interesting that it's like Soundgarden version of like bit of that psychedelic Cream kind
Mm.
of music. And I can see where that's coming from a little bit then. It just sounds like a very demented 90s version of that kind of thing,
Well,
which
there
Right.
was a lot of
makes
acid, I think.
sense.
There was a lot of acid that went down the chute. I don't know if it's
Yeah.
specifically this album, but like uh from what I've read, like punk and metal were where Soundgarden thought they came from.
Mhm.
But punk and metal came from classic rock, right? Which came from blues. So it's weird, like what filters through, and
Mhm.
then what you do with it when you have a mind like Cornell, who was a drummer, by the way. I found that out today. I didn't know Chris
Oh, that.
Cornell was the original drummer of Soundgarden, and then they found out he could sing, and they were like, "Dude, get out from behind the kit, like you're the front man."
Wow. Oh man. That's
Look at all
crazy.
them drummers. Dave Grohl. And it's just like, obviously, Foo Fighters is one of the most successful rock bands of the past like 25 years. So like it obviously worked out for him. But no, that's interesting. They pulled a Phil Collins.
That's crazy.
But
Wow.
Phil Collins wasn't playing in like 5/4 and I don't know 7/8 and whatever these weird time signatures
Yeah.
are they pulled together for this. So that same it was all in one binge on YouTube, the Beato thing that I went on. Apparently Cornell was trying to play in these weird time signatures and sing at the same time, and he couldn't do it. So they were like, either we need a singer or we need a drummer. So they got a new drummer.
You
And they
choose.
Chris Cornell sing. Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. Wow. That's wild. Man, that's so cool. Because he's
You
like a
know,
singer of that generation,
Yeah.
you know.
and he could have just been the drummer of Soundgarden.
Some other grunge band.
Which like it's so interesting because I obviously have a lot of respect for you all that make music because like I've loved music my whole entire life and I've only half-assed tried to learn how to play music. So like I never really fully committed to it. But some performers I'm just like, how? How do you do these things? Like when Geddy Lee's standing there singing like Geddy Lee, playing bass and keyboards at the same time, it's just like, what are you doing? And then it's so funny, quoting from Beyond the Lighted Stage, like, I'm pretty sure he wouldn't have been able to do all that if he didn't have the nose that he had. He's like, hook the microphone. It's like, I forget who said that, but it was like a metal band guy in Beyond the Lighted Stage, one of the commentators. But like, I can't imagine playing like this kind of music while also trying to sing the way Chris Cornell does.
Beyond the Lighted Stage, was that the documentary about drummers on like Netflix or something?
No, this is specifically
Rush. Okay.
Rush.
Okay.
So it was perfect arm reach length. So that's why I was able to show it very specifically. But it's so interesting because it's like music, like post grunge bands started with, which there's so much nostalgia now. I don't know if either of you are picking up on this on like social media, that there's a big apologist movement for Nickelback and Creed at this point.
Oh no, I didn't know.
Especially Creed.
Huh.
It's like now that everybody's like 25 years older, they're just like, we're too harsh on you, Creed. And now we just want to get drunk at like a family block party and sing with arms wide open. And stuff like that. But it's very interesting that like that stuff gets labeled like post grunge because it's like it's whatever like came out of this very specific period in time because like grunge didn't last a long time.
No, it was a
Not
very
at
short
all.
window of time.
But I mean, that's kind of why I was interested to hear what you guys had to say about grunge music, because that's kind of the narrative, the media narrative that we've gotten, or it's the punchline of a joke, some comedian was in college longer than grunge music was around, like they outlasted grunge music.
They're
But
called
it's just
doctors.
a word, though. It's just a word,
Right, right. Yeah, no, it's you have to remember that these were great musicians who came together at the right time. Some of them, not all of them, but some of them had metal, like hair metal continued. Some of them would have continued into that era and might have sang or played guitar in like hair metal bands. Some of them did. Um,
Have you guys seen Cornell's hair back in the early 90s? Beautiful. Fucking beautiful. Like,
I did not
like
expect
better
you to
than
say
Hozier's hair.
that.
The guy could have done pop music if he
Gorgeous.
wanted to. He was a
Gorgeous head of hair.
Well, that's
wow.
the thing. Like his voice too. I'm pretty sure he could have did whatever the hell he wanted in whatever kind of music.
Exactly.
And
Right. They were, yeah, super talented cats in a lot of these bands. The only person who I can't see doing anything other than grunge is Kurt
it,
Cobain. I don't know if I could see him.
I
I could
thought you were
see,
going to say Eddie Vedder. And I'm
It's
yeah,
his
like,
own fault. It's Kurt Cobain's own fault, man. He opted out too soon, you know?
yeah. Well, so here that's the funny thing. In one of his last interviews, Kurt Cobain admitted that the next he kind of was tired on the whole grunge thing that they were doing, and he wanted to do like a progressive rock album. That was like the next thing that Kurt Cobain said that he wanted to do. It would have been very interesting to see him try that because he had done such a good job of developing that character, both real, whatever it was. I'm sure it was very real in his art, you know. But
I
yeah,
think there's
no,
some progressive, I think there's some prog in this album. I
for
really
sure.
do think so. Yeah.
Yeah, they obviously had the ability to play that style of music, with the changing time signatures and all the different, obviously had the ability. It was just that was not the thing. That wasn't going to sell records. And not that this generation of rock star was all about just selling records. Obviously, like if you go back to when they were younger, Eddie Vedder, you can hear Eddie Vedder talking about how selling records is not our main thing. That's not what we're trying to do. And guys from like Aerosmith and other like rock bands of the day who were like, who, by the way, Aerosmith were still on their second high resurgence at this time. Were like, what's wrong with them? This is all about selling records. What are you doing this for if you're not here to sell records? It's like, no, this
and
this
get
was a very
laid.
this was a different group of guys. Kurt Cobain was like, it was almost like they were on a trip. I think that's one of the reasons why the era is short-lived as it is because a lot of them were not trying to take up real estate and like just have their, oh, now we're going to go multi-platinum and now we're going to sell 20 million and now we're going to become like Michael Jackson level. They didn't want that. A lot of them, that wasn't their goal. It wasn't their mission. They didn't really want to be famous. Some of these cats, like Cobain doesn't want to be famous. Eddie Vedder doesn't want to be famous. I'm not sure what Chris Cornell wanted. They probably just wanted to get paid well to be good musicians, which is what every musician wants. They want to be paid well to be good musicians. So if you make it at this level and you have thousands, tens of thousands of people in front of you, you can continue to do that. But eventually you're going to burn out in an era like this. Eventually it's all going to fizzle out and burn out, you know, and it's and then to the point of like how many grunge albums can you make in a row, you know? And I also find it funny going back to Pearl Jam, Eddie Vedder. Um, you know, Eddie Vedder is one of the most hot. You guys said this was a negative album. You're right. A lot of it does sound negative. Eddie Vedder was like the most positive sounding one out of this entire class. He's also, sadly, the only one who's still around.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lane Staley is gone. Chris Cornell is gone. Kurt Cobain is gone. Stone Temple Pilots. I'm sorry.
Scott Weiland.
Scott Weiland. He's gone. Eddie Vedder's like one of the only ones.
When
One
did
of the,
Scott Weiland? Oh no, I knew that. I did know that actually. Yeah, I
yeah,
did.
he's got.
And
So
I understand that Eddie Vedder and Chris Cornell were good friends.
yeah. Oh
I
yeah.
noticed, and I don't know, like you said, I don't know how much of this is the persona, but I noticed the marked shift between the audio slave Chris Cornell and or rather the other way around, and the Soundgarden Chris Cornell. The messages are much more positive in audio slave music, lyrically speaking.
There's like a redemption. There's a redemption quality to the Audio Slave stuff.
Maybe, or they just felt like the music in 1993 or 4 or whenever this was.
Uh-huh.
Maybe just that grungy sound called for more depressing music, or maybe he was actually, he was really dealing with some shit. But the fact that he lasted as long as he did, to me, I might have said this in our last session too, but like that's positive to me. That's a triumph that he lived to 50, whatever he was when he opted out, as opposed to Cobain, who was famously 27, like
yeah.
Anybody could be like, oh, I'm 27 now, like I've had a good run and I'm out. Or you can stay in it, in the pain and the frustration and dissatisfaction and the negativity and try to, do something with it. And I feel like Cornell did that. I think that's why I, relate to Cornell personally.
Sure.
Well, I feel like this music came at a specific time culturally because it was a backlash to the sheen of the 80s where it was all about money and you'd be watching like the homes of the rich and famous and all that kind of stuff, and like the 80s were a very specific kind of time, and this was certainly a backlash to that. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of underbelly seediness about the 80s that people don't want to acknowledge.
Right.
Kind of feels like the 80s were the 50s all over again, where people were like, we don't want to talk about the dark stuff that's going on underneath. And grunge music was the dark stuff going on underneath.
Right.
And
Like
and
now.
it's back again.
Yeah.
Which is maybe
but
why it's coming back round again.
Yeah.
Well,
We've
there was
been a little stuck. Now's a little different. We're all a little stuck. I think we're a little stuck. Get ready. It's gonna get scary depending on what happens in the next few weeks. But yeah, I mean, I think the 80s just didn't speak to some people. And remember, there's some great bands, even if you don't love grunge, there's some great bands, a door opened because of this. Bands like Tool, no doubt, Weezer, just a lot of really cool bands that came through because it was like, hey, you're allowed to go this deep and dark. You're allowed to do this. So I think that's kind of special because I don't know if you'd have some of those bands if the doors didn't open, for a more a subversion of pop, a subversion of pop music, you know what I mean? Versus
Fun fact, Soundgarden recorded the first single for Sub Pop Records.
Oh, really? The first
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Is that the same label that Nirvana was signed to?
I think so, yeah. And then
Yeah.
Soundgarden was trying to get away from that, but like I like that you mentioned Tool. Also Trent Reznor. I was thinking about Trent Reznor today. Like now that I knew the conversation was coming, I was thinking about Reznor and how like he also very negative, depressive, maybe fucking insane genius, right? But when I listen to a Nine Inch Nails album, I feel icky and gross after.
Yeah.
But after listening to this album, I feel like I can go fight someone. And that is a big difference.
Yeah. Right. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, Trent Reznor is a major introvert who became a rock star. That's a bad recipe. You don't want to be a giant introvert and then become a rock star. That's a horrible concoction. That's why
and then he became
you
a
know,
famous composer.
yeah.
So
Right, exactly, which is probably one of the reasons why he went in that direction.
But so was Cornell, right? He was a huge introvert too. He was like he had social anxiety, whatever. That's probably why he's hiding behind the drum kit. And then they were like, come out here and stand in front of 10,000 people with your shirt off,
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
I would like to go on record and say that Tool scares me.
Tools, right? Cheer Tool is not one of my favorites. I do like some of their songs, and I think that
I'll tell you,
Primus
Primus scares me, man.
Primus was another band.
Scare me. It's the
Right.
drugs that scare me.
Sure. Yeah, Primus is wicked. That's a wild sound.
Wait, you mean South Park? Going down to South Park to meet some friends of mine.
Yeah.
But
Wait,
I
wait, wait.
remember
Is that Winona's Big Brown Beaver? Which song is that? They did the South Park
That's a
theme.
different
Is that
song,
what you're
Jim. I
telling me?
think it's a different song.
Oh
well,
man, maybe it shouldn't
Primus
be.
is the band that did the South Park theme song.
I wonder if there was something like subconscious there that was like, no, 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 no South Park for me. No, thank you. Thank you.
Like Primus performed at the 25th anniversary South Park concert that they did
No
in
way.
Colorado. And it was so funny because Primus was there, Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson performed at it,
Oh
and
wow.
then Garth Brooks did. I mean, uh, Trey Parker. If you haven't seen Trey Parker lately, he looks a little Garth Brooksy.
Oh,
You don't want to look like Garth Brooks right now. Um, all that shit going on with him and his makeup artist.
oh,
Um,
oh, I didn't hear
that
about
stuff.
that. That's okay.
Um, going back to a thought earlier, I find it very interesting that Kurt Cobain wanted to do a prog rock album because he's the one that I would least likely see or hear performing progressive rock music. Like I could hear Chris Cornell singing on a progressive rock
Yeah,
album.
right.
Not Kurt Cobain though.
I
That's a
think
little strange for
I
me.
think I think Cobain probably was also looking for a way out, of kind of the hoopla that was around.
He was going
Uh,
to pull his own Caress of Steel on purpose and
Mhm.
try to burn it all down.
that was not a great album. I'm sorry. You agree?
No,
It's a weird
no,
album.
that almost killed Rush forever.
Yeah. But it's
So
no, it's interesting when we talk about grunge. We'll look back and like listen to these records and there's some special songs, special talented, people, even if you don't necessarily like every song, it was different. There is a song there I did want to mention because we've talked a little bit about Pearl Jam. There's two songs on here that I think it's is it called Last Wave? I lost My Wave.
My Wave.
yep.
My Wave sounds
It
like
was a single. It was
you
a
could
single.
very, in my
They knew
opinion,
Chris Cornell sounded amazing. Everybody sounds amazing on this whole album, but like My Wave was accessible for a song that was in a weird time signature.
it's weird. I also could easily see Eddie Vedder replacing him on the vocals for this one and this being a Pearl Jam. So I don't know why. There's something about when I listen to some of the songs on Verses or Verses, uh, the
Oh,
Pearl Jam
that
record.
libertarian anthem, My Wave, is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah, My Wave, it sounds like it could have been a Pearl Jam song. I just fed that's, of the era, And then there's another one, I think it's Head Down, which I really like. Sounds like that could have very easily been a Lane Staley, like Alice in Chains,
Interesting.
Jerry Cantrell. Like,
So the lyrics from off I just love the way he sings them. I love the way Cornell holds a note and then puts it down again.
mm.
Uh, I don't know if it's bluesy. Thanks, Joe, for not coming on the podcast. What I rely on my brother for, but like I would love the way he lets go of those notes. So like cry if you want to cry, if it clears your eyes, if it helps you see something. I lost the last one. I like that. But then it's like hate if you want to hate. If it keeps you safe, if it makes you brave. And
that
I
I
don't like that line. Yeah.
distinctly remember that listening to this. I'm like, that says a lot about a lot of people
Mhm.
today.
But
Like a
again,
lot
30
of
years
people.
ago. That's like a full generation ago. 30 years is like a solid generation ago. So I
Yeah.
don't know that Chris Cornell would have written the same lyric. Well, he'd be an old man today, but
I'm sorry, Jim. This was My Wave, or this was
My
something.
Wave, yeah. Hate
My
if
Wave.
you want to hate, if it keeps you
Mhm.
safe, if it makes you brave. That was the lyric. Yeah.
Wow.
Shane, you had something to say about this, yeah?
Well, it I distinctly remember listening to this and that line happening, and I'm just like, I feel like that strikes a chord with so many people at this present moment that
Yes.
just makes our world not a great place to live in. Because it's like
Mm.
that is all it is about. That you convince yourself that the hate that you have is justified because it's going to keep you and your family safe. But the reason that you hate those people or this group of people is manufactured for you.
So here's the
And
way I heard that. I didn't, because I think that's today when we hear hate, we do think of it as hate towards a group of people.
hmm,
To me, knowing Cornell, that he's a depressive type of antisocial person, um, there was a movie quote that I thought about this week. Um, it's a female, it's a female character, maybe a Marvel movie, and she goes, "Sometimes anger helps keep you alive." Does that? Do you guys? I don't. I don't know what movie that was from, but I resonate with that as a depressive person. Like sometimes anger getting you out of bed and just getting you on your feet and on that path to work and whatever. Sometimes that's what you need. So that's the way I hear that lyric. I don't hear it as if you need to hate a group of people, then hate them. The
well,
way I think
is
of it is if you need that fire, harness that fire and go, you know?
well, I guess how I was listening to it was like, was that supposed to be condoning that? Or is it like pointing out like this is what people will do to justify themselves and do what they need to do.
Mm,
And because people justify their hate through safety all the time for them and their families.
yeah.
That is an insane, it's like it's all about the when it comes to police brutality and stuff like that, it's just like I don't care what's happening to certain people. The police are keeping me safe. But then you don't think about other people aren't safe. They're not safe from you. But the thing is, you don't really care about that. It that line just like hit really hard when I was listening to the album. I think it was a couple of nights ago. I had it on. I'm just like, damn, that just resonates in a whole different way in 2024
Mm.
because it basically fuels half our country. So,
Yeah, there's I heard that lyric too and I was like I don't like the message of the song, you know. I it comes back to the like music before lyrics thing. I think we've talked about this a bunch of times. Like I listen to the sound of the music first and I'm like, yeah, that sounds awesome and that feels great.
Mhm.
Like there are a lot of not even just that one. There are a lot of lyrics on this album that are problematic even. Um I think he'd admit that. I think he would as somebody who I mean, so he was in his 30s when he made this album,
mhm.
but he came out of punk and metal scene, um, antisocial guy, a lot of drugs, a lot of alcohol, and then he made it into his 50s. To me, I think he'd have some commentary on this album if he were still with us. But it's not really fair to put words in his mouth either, is it?
Sure. I mean, I have things I wrote when I was in a metal band. I would not sing again. Oh my Lord. It was we were we were kind of digging deep and dark into things. And so sure, I wouldn't sing that stuff again. But it's also difficult, just seeing the lyrics as they are. I was just rereading them, you know, it's it's always hard to say exactly what an artist is trying to express, just the way they put lyrics together, you know? Um, You know, I don't think I hope that the intent wasn't to rationalize, you know, like, oh, it's okay to hate, you know. I hope not, because yeah, no, it's become a very sensitive topic, you know, with hating a whole group or hating one person. Um, Absolutely. I don't know.
No, I like that. Two of the questions I had written down, I was looking at my notes beforehand, and I would love to play this album for somebody who doesn't speak English, and then ask them what they think it was about. Like,
Mm.
what are the ideas here? But I also wanted to ask you guys about activities. Like Alex, you said it's workout music, or Spoon Man was workout music.
Yeah, yeah.
For me, this is driving music. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah,
That
which is probably not great because like being angry behind the wheel of a vehicle is not the best place to be. But I don't
sure.
know. Shane, was there a place and a time that you liked to hear some of these songs?
Like it's funny because I listened to this mostly in the car, when I was driving, um, or like sitting in my office at work. Um, but like I'm not really the kind of person that has like moods for things. So like movie wise, I could throw on any movie at any given time and just watch it. Like that's the kind of person I am, and it kind of feels that way about music. But yeah, there's certain like I don't even work out with music anymore. I go to the gym, I'm in, I'm out, and leave and stuff like that. But I feel like what are the songs that I'm gonna go back and listen to from this? It's like I will still occasionally listen to Black Hole Song. I do really like Spoon Man. I actually really liked My Wave a lot. That was definitely one of the other ones besides Limo Wreck that stood out to
Mm.
me on this. And I still probably won't listen to like Soundgarden albums in their entirety from start to finish.
Right.
But I'll still go back and listen to some of the music from this for sure.
Yeah, it's funny back to the whole like mentality of the time. So I'm not sure that they were making some of these records with the intention for you to listen through it like over and over and over again. It almost feels like they wanted to like, I don't know, at some point in the album they wanted you to feel like you just got kicked in the crotch, you know. You know, like who does that? That's kind of why, you know, like I like as a songwriter, I kind of like it because I don't play a lot of songs like that very often. But sometimes at an open mic, I'm gonna play the really dark one tonight, you know, and you know, maybe it'll ruffle somebody's feathers or, you know, maybe it'll, yeah, I don't know. It's nice to have, it's very cool to be able to write stuff like that. But I don't think like Californication is a type of album. A lot of people talk about it like, oh, it's like an ice cream sundae. You just get to the bottom of it and you just want more. That's not this, you know, that's not Soundgarden. I don't even think Pearl Jam's like that. I think a lot of grunge bands of the era, like, I don't think they weren't trying to make a Motown record, you know what I mean? It was like, it was supposed to be like, yeah, we're gonna rub your face in some shit, you know, and by the, you know, you might bang your head to a few songs, but I almost feel like they were okay with that. It's weird. It's weird. You know, it was much more punk. It was much more leaning into like punk, hardcore punk, like side of things,
Yeah,
rather.
yeah. I came up. I didn't come up. I came across two definitions for like the genre that Soundgarden is, and they were acid punk and Zen metal. And I feel like both of those kind of make sense.
That makes a lot of sense to me,
Yeah.
actually. So that's funny. There's definitely, it's funny you mentioned the acid. You said they were like doing acid. That
Yes.
can,
I know well, I know because I read that the band members were drinking and doing acid at a young age, like
yeah,
teenagers. But this album, they were in their three-quarters of the band were in their 30s.
Okay.
I think the
Yeah.
bass player was a bit younger than the rest of the guys.
Okay.
But this album was from a Soundgarden that knew what they were good at
Yeah.
and still sounded good. Again, I keep saying that, but like I can't get over how good Chris Cornell sounds on this record.
He's
Just
so he's
like whatever he screams or sings or snarls, like it just all sounds amazing.
iconic.
So they had a sense of themselves, you know what I mean? But unlike Idols that we talked about, like I don't a long time ago now.
Yeah.
The themes were more gut from Chris Cornell, who is a depressive guy who tends to be a little negative, I guess, as opposed to, you know, a band that thought we want to make this statement to the world, you know? And again, this was their first really big record. So I don't think they thought about it too much.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. Crazy.
Well, I guess at this point, do we have any other thoughts or anything we want to throw out about our album, Soundgarden, grunge music?
I'm glad we listened to this one. It had to grow on me. It definitely had to grow on me. But then once it did, I was like, ooh. So yeah.
I don't regret listening to this album all the way through. Mailman is on steady replay right now.
And I'm wanting you all the way.
I love how he switches between the scream and just the speaking voice. It's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
But funny anecdote, I've requested this song in the car with my girlfriend, and she was like, I asked her what she thought about it. She was like, okay, it's a little scary, but she had the image of like a Pony Express rider riding his horse. And to me, I heard him say writing, like letters to
I'm
people,
writing you all the way.
which is kind of funny that they would name the song on a mishearing of the lyrics. But then now when I hear the song, I think of a horse riding his asshole postman through the desert. And that is my mental image for the song. But to leave, yeah, on a leaving note, there's a movie called Hype with an exclamation point about grunge out of Seattle. I didn't know it existed until today, but I'm definitely going to watch it right now because the description is, it says it's about the music that came out of Seattle and then kind of the overexposure of it. And it sounds like it ends on kind of a bittersweet moment because I don't think grunge was designed to be pop rock, but that's what it became anyway. Right. And that's why it's such an interesting thing still, you know?
Yeah.
It's a little genre that was never meant to be mainstream and then struck chord in the early 90s and then became a lot bigger than probably anybody thought it would be.
It's wild.
And it changed music forever.
It's true.
And that's not a lot of genre, like not a lot of periods of music can be given that distinction of permanently changing a whole entire genre of music.
In a very short period of time, yeah. Yeah.
Well, those are our thoughts from Alex and Jim. Thank you both for coming on and talking some music with me.
Thank you, Shane. You're the man. We love you.
And thank you, as always, for tuning in and supporting your Wasteland reviewer.